There's a sound you never forget, the creak of your own spine bending under someone else's weight. It echoes louder than any scream. In the history of the Northern Kingdoms, no Luna Queen had ever been reduced to furniture. But on the day of the Ascension ceremony, Valeraine didn't just lose her crown. She became a step beneath it. She thought it was the end of her story. She didn't know that the ancient spirit of the land, a force that had chosen sovereigns for 1,000 years, was watching. And it was about to decide that some kings deserve to burn, and some queens are too sacred to break. The winter had turned the Northern Kingdom into a fortress of ice and stone. But inside the great hall of the Obsidian Castle, the air was suffocatingly warm. It smelled of burning cedar, expensive perfumes, and the metallic tang of fear. Valeraine stood near the servants' entrance, her hands clasped tightly in front of her to hide the tremors. She was 28 years old, but in the harsh torchlight, under the scrutiny of the kingdom's elite, she felt ancient and hollowed out. Her dress, a rough gray tunic meant for scullery maids, looked painfully drab against the sea of velvet cloaks and jeweled gowns surrounding her. She was the Luna Queen. Technically, she had been fated mate to Alpha King Malachor for 6 years. 6 years of managing the kingdom's alliances. 6 years of mediating disputes between the territorial lords and keeping the treasury balanced. And 6 years of waiting for Malachor to look at her with something other than cold indifference. The murmurs of the crowd died down as the massive bronze doors at the far end of the hall swung open. Malachor emerged. He was a devastating man, possessing that brutal, commanding presence that made the Bloodcrown dynasty legendary. Broad-shouldered, with dark hair swept back like a raven's wing and eyes the color of amber fire. But today he wasn't alone. Walking beside him, her arm looped possessively through his, was Vayne. A collective gasp rippled through the hall. Vayne was the daughter of a rival territory's warlord, a woman from the southern reaches known for its wealth and cruelty. She was everything Valeraine was not. Sharp-featured, glacially beautiful, and radiating the kind of confidence that came from never having been denied anything. She wore a gown of liquid gold silk that clung to every curve, and on her head sat a crown of black diamonds that caught the firelight like captured stars. Around her throat was a choker of hammered silver that likely cost more than the kingdom's annual grain supply. Valeraine felt the blood drain from her face. Malachor had told her this gathering was a formal treaty signing. He hadn't told her he was bringing his mistress to the throne. Brothers, sisters, wolves of the north. Malachor's voice boomed, amplified by the stone acoustics of the ancient hall. He didn't use amplification magic. He didn't need it. His alpha presence rolled over the crowd like a physical force, making the weaker wolves drop their gazes instinctively. We stand at a crossroads. The Northern Kingdom is strong. But to survive the coming wars and the shifting powers of the Continental Council, we need more than strength. We need wealth. We need ruthless alliances. He looked down at the assembled nobles, his eyes sliding right over Valeraine as if she were a shadow on the wall. For the past year, Vayne of the Southern Reaches has been instrumental in securing our borders and funding our military expansion. Her bloodline is ancient. Her strategic mind is unmatched. Valeraine took a trembling step forward, her heart hammering so hard it hurt. "Malachor," she whispered, though the sound was swallowed by the silence. Malachor paused. He finally looked at her. There was no love in that gaze. There wasn't even recognition. There was only the cold assessment of a king discarding a broken tool. "Valeraine," Malachor said, his voice dropping an octave, becoming dangerously soft. "Step forward." The crowd parted like a knife through silk. Valeraine felt the weight of 1,000 eyes on her back, some pitying, some eager for the spectacle. She walked the long stretch of polished black marble, her worn shoes making no sound. She stopped 10 feet from the raised dais where the obsidian throne sat, ancient and imposing. "You have been a dutiful companion," Malachor said. The word companion landed like a slap. They were fated mates. They had a sacred bond, or they used to, before he learned to smother it with potions and willpower. But duty is not enough to rule a kingdom in these times. The North needs a Luna Queen who can bring power, not just maintenance. Vayne smirked, a small, cruel curving of her crimson lips. She leaned into Malachar, resting her perfectly coiffed head on his shoulder. "I am severing our bond, Valerain," Malachar stated, "effective immediately." The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Bond severance wasn't just a rejection for a werewolf. It was a tearing of the soul. It was spiritual violence. Valerain gasped, clutching her chest as a sharp, searing pain ripped through her sternum. It felt as though invisible claws had reached inside her ribcage and torn something vital loose. She fell to one knee, not out of submission, but out of agony. "Malachar, please," she choked out, tears blurring her vision. "The bond, you can't just—" "It is already done," Malachar said coldly. "The High Council has approved the annulment. Vayne is my chosen mate. She is your new Luna Queen." A murmur of dissent rippled through the older members of the court. Elder Thuron, the kingdom's historian, looked ready to object, but a sharp glare from Malachar's enforcers silenced him. "But simply replacing you isn't enough," Malachar continued, his ego swelling with each word. He needed to prove to Vayne's family that he was in absolute control. He needed to show that the old ways, the ways of fated mates and sacred bonds, meant nothing compared to his ambition. To ensure there is no confusion in the kingdom, no divided loyalties, we need a demonstration. Malachar gestured toward the base of the throne's dais, where 3 stone steps led up to the obsidian seat of power. "Vayne will ascend to her rightful place, and you, Valerain, will assist her." The room went deathly silent. Valerain looked up, sweat beading on her forehead from the pain of the severed bond. "What?" "You heard your king," Vayne purred, her voice like honey laced with venom. "I find these steps too steep for a queen of my stature. I require assistance." Malachar's smile was cruel and lazy. "Kneel at the base of the steps, Valerain. Make yourself useful one final time." "I am the daughter of the former High Counselor," Valerain said, her voice shaking but gaining a thread of steel. "I have served this kingdom my entire life. I have bled for it. I will not." Malachar's eyes flashed gold, the sign of his alpha wolf rising. The pressure in the room increased tenfold. The alpha command slammed into Valerain's shoulders, a psychic weight designed to force submission. "I said kneel." It wasn't a request. It was a biological compulsion. Every instinct in Valerain's wolf screamed at her to submit, to bare her neck, to survive. Her knees trembled. The pain in her chest was blinding. But she fought it. She bit her tongue until copper filled her mouth. "Do it, Val," a voice whispered from the crowd. It was Kale, the warrior commander who had always been kind to her. He looked terrified. "He'll kill you, just, please." Malachar descended the 3 steps of the dais, dragging Vayne with him. He stopped directly in front of Valerain. He grabbed a handful of her silver blonde hair and yanked her head back, forcing her to look up at Vayne's sneering face. "You were always too soft for this world, Valerain," Malachar hissed into her ear. "Too gentle, too weak. Look at her. Look at a real queen." He shoved her down. Valerain's resistance shattered under the physical and mental assault. Her remaining knee hit the marble with a sickening thud. She was on both hands and knees now, positioned at the base of the 3 stone steps, breathing raggedly. "Perfect," Vayne laughed, a light, tinkling sound that echoed through the silent hall like breaking glass. "You make an excellent footstool, darling." Malachar turned to the crowd, arms spread wide in theatrical triumph. "Behold, the past bows to the future. I give you your new Luna Queen." Vayne began her ascent. She paused deliberately on the 2nd step, turning back with a cruel smile. "Actually, Malachar darling," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness, "I believe I need just a bit more help. This last step is dreadfully high." She looked down at Valerain, who was trembling on her hands and knees at the base. "Use her," Vayne commanded. Malachar's grin widened. "As my queen wishes." He placed his boot on Valerain's lower back, pressing down just enough to make his point. "Don't move." "Packless, you're finally serving your purpose." Vayne descended 1 step, positioning herself directly above Valerain. She lifted her foot, clad in a silver stiletto forged with wolfbane alloy, designed to hurt shifters, and placed it squarely on Valerain's spine. The weight pressed down, sharp, degrading, absolute. Valerain gasped, her arms shaking as she fought to hold the position. The crowd watched in horrified silence. Some looked away, others stared, hungry for the spectacle. Vayne used Valerain's back as a step, pressing her full weight onto her spine to reach the final platform. There, Vayne cooed, finally standing before the obsidian throne. Much better. Malachor applauded. A few sycophantic nobles joined him. Valerain remained on her hands and knees, feeling the bruising pain radiating through her vertebrae. A single thought burned through the agony. This is how I disappear. This is how I become nothing. And then, a sound. Low, guttural, inhuman. It wasn't coming from Valerain. It was coming from beneath them. The sound started as a rumble so deep it was felt rather than heard. It vibrated through the marble floor, through Valerain's hands and knees, through the bones of every person in the great hall. For a moment, everyone froze. Malachor mid-applause, Vayne balanced on Valerain's spine with one foot raised toward the throne, the nobles half-turned toward each other in confused murmurs. Then the floor began to shake. Stone dust rained down from the vaulted ceiling in pale streams, catching the torchlight like falling snow. The massive iron chandeliers swayed on their chains, their flames guttering and dancing. The sound grew louder, transforming from a rumble into a groan, the kind of sound a living thing makes when it's been wounded mortally. What? Malachor's voice cut off as the first crack appeared. It split the marble floor directly beneath the dais, a hairline fracture that spread with terrifying speed. But it wasn't a normal crack. The stone didn't simply break. It began to shimmer, the solid surface rippling like water disturbed by a stone. Vayne stumbled, her silver stiletto slipping off Valerain's back as she fought for balance. Malachor! Her voice, usually so controlled, cracked with genuine fear. The stones beneath the obsidian throne didn't just crack, they liquefied. The ancient black marble turned translucent, then transparent, then simply ceased to be solid. It flowed like water, like oil, like something that had never been stone at all. The transformation spread outward in a perfect circle, centered precisely on the throne itself. Everyone back, Cale's voice cut through the rising panic. Away from the dais. But there was no time. The floor opened. Not slowly, not with warning. One moment there was stone, and the next there was absence, a massive chasm that tore through the great hall with the sound of reality itself screaming. The void that appeared was not empty darkness. It glowed with churning light, magma the color of sunset, of rage, of divine fury. Shadows writhed within the molten glow like living things, like memories given form. The obsidian throne, the ancient seat of power that had crowned kings for 1,000 years, tilted. For one surreal moment, it teetered on the edge of existence, its carved arms reaching toward the ceiling as if in supplication. Then it fell. The throne disappeared into the chasm without a sound, swallowed by light and shadow as if it had never been. Vayne screamed. She had been standing on the platform, one foot still raised from stepping on Valerain, her arms windmilling as the ground beneath her simply ceased to exist. She reached for Malachor, her perfectly manicured fingers grasping at air. Malachor lunged for her, his alpha reflexes finally kicking in. His hand closed around her wrist just as the platform dissolved beneath them both. For a heartbeat, they seemed to hang suspended, the mighty Alpha King and his beautiful chosen queen, frozen in the moment of their fall. Then gravity remembered them. Vayne's scream was high and piercing, a sound of pure animal terror that cut through every other noise in the hall. Malachor's roar was deeper, edged with disbelief and rage, the sound of someone who had never imagined they could be denied anything, even the ground beneath their feet. They fell together into the chasm, still reaching for each other, their forms silhouetted against the hellish glow. The magma rose to meet them like an embrace, like judgment, like the earth itself opening its mouth to swallow what it could no longer tolerate. The screams stopped abruptly. The destruction continued to spread, the floor liquefying in concentric circles, swallowing the steps of the dais, eating through marble that had stood for centuries. Nobles scrambled backward, their screams adding to the chaos. Some tried to flee toward the exits. Others simply stood frozen, unable to process what they were witnessing. The dissolution reached Valoraine's hands and stopped. The transformation halted with surgical precision exactly where her fingers pressed against the marble, not an inch further. The stone beneath her palms remained solid, cool, unchanged. But beyond her hands, the floor simply wasn't there anymore. She knelt at the very edge of a massive chasm that glowed with impossible light, the heat of it making the air shimmer and dance. Valeraine couldn't move. She remained frozen on her hands and knees, her silver-blonde hair hanging around her face, her breath coming in short, sharp gasps. Beneath her, the marble was solid. Beyond her fingertips, nothing but void and fire. The great hall fell silent. The roar of the magma far below was the only sound, a constant rumble like distant thunder, like the earth breathing. Stone dust continued to drift down from the ceiling in lazy spirals. The chandeliers still swayed slightly on their chains, but every voice, every footstep, every whisper had ceased. Valeraine slowly, carefully lifted her head. The chasm stretched before her, perhaps 30 feet across, perfectly circular. The obsidian throne was gone. The dais was gone. Malachor was gone. Vane was gone, all of it swallowed by the earth itself. And she remained, untouched at the precipice's edge. A movement in her peripheral vision. Elder Thuron had fallen to his knees, his ancient face slack with awe and terror. His lips moved soundlessly, forming words in the old tongue, prayers, or perhaps recognition of something he had only read about in forbidden texts. One by one, others began to kneel. Not out of command, not from fear or political calculation. This was something older, something instinctive. The kind of reverence that predated crowns and titles, that reached back to when wolves first learned to recognize power in its truest form. Cale dropped to one knee, his sword arm across his chest in a warrior's salute. His eyes were wide, but there was no fear in them, only understanding. The nobles followed, their expensive clothes pooling around them on the dusty marble. The guards, the servants who had crept forward from the shadows, even those who had laughed when Vane stepped on Valeraine's back now pressed their foreheads to the floor. They knelt before the chasm, before the judgment, before the woman who remained. Valeraine's arms trembled. The adrenaline was fatting, leaving behind exhaustion and a bone-deep cold that had nothing to do with temperature. She remained on her hands and knees, afraid to move, afraid that if she shifted even an inch, the protection, if that's what it was, would fail, and she too would fall into that glowing void. But the stone beneath her hands was warm now, not with the heat of magma, but with something else, something that felt almost like welcome. Slowly, carefully, Valeraine pushed herself back from the edge. Her muscles screamed in protest, but she managed to sit back on her heels. She looked down at her hands, half expecting to see them burned or changed. They looked the same, calloused, dirty, still bearing the marks of the scrub brush. But when a drop of sweat fell from her forehead onto the marble, something impossible happened. Where the moisture touched stone, a tiny green shoot sprouted. A seedling, impossibly alive, pushing up through solid rock as if the marble were soft earth. Valeraine stared at it, her breath catching. The earth had opened its mouth and swallowed a king. But it had held its hand over a queen. The silence shattered like glass. Someone screamed, then another. The kneeling crowd erupted into chaos, nobles shouting over each other, guards rushing toward the chasm with weapons drawn as if they could somehow fight the earth itself, servants fleeing toward the exits in blind panic. The great hall, moments ago frozen in reverent awe, transformed into a maelstrom of terror and confusion. Valeraine remained motionless at the precipice's edge, staring at the tiny green shoot that had sprouted from stone. Her mind felt distant, detached, as if she were watching all of this happen to someone else. The heat from the chasm washed over her in waves, but she couldn't seem to feel it. couldn't feel anything except a strange, hollow numbness where her thoughts should be. Strong hands gripped her shoulders. Valeraine, Valeraine, you need to move. Kale's voice, urgent but controlled. He was trying to pull her back from the edge, away from the glowing void. She looked up at him. His face was pale beneath his warrior's tan, his dark eyes wide with barely contained fear. For her, she realized, he was afraid for her. I can't, she heard herself say. Her voice sounded strange, dreamlike. If I move. The ground is stable here. Look. He stamped his boot on the marble a few feet back from the edge. It remained solid, unchanged. Whatever happened, it stopped. But you need to get away from there, please. Valeraine looked down at her hands one more time, at the impossible seedling growing from stone, then let Kale pull her to her feet. Her legs buckled immediately. She hadn't realized how much she'd been trembling. Kale caught her before she fell, lifting her into his arms as if she weighed nothing. I've got you, he murmured, carrying her away from the chasm toward the far wall where other survivors had gathered. You're safe. Safe, the word felt meaningless. Nothing was safe. The world had just opened its mouth and swallowed a king. Kale set her down gently on a stone bench that ran along the wall. Someone, a servant girl with tears streaming down her face, pressed a cup of water into her hands. Valeraine stared at it, unable to remember what she was supposed to do with it. Around them, the chaos continued to build. Captain Drenner, head of the King's Guard, was shouting orders to his men, trying to establish some kind of perimeter around the chasm. Several guards had already been dispatched to check the structural integrity of the castle, to see if the destruction had spread beyond the Great Hall. Someone get a rope, one guard shouted. We need to search for survivors. Survivors? Another guard's voice cracked with hysteria. Did you see what happened? There are no survivors. Near the main entrance, a cluster of territorial lords had formed a tight circle, their voices rising in heated argument. Lord Blackmere, a massive wolf with scars crisscrossing his face, was the loudest. This was an attack, foreign magic. The Eastern Territories have finally made their move. Don't be a fool, Lady Ashcroft snapped, her silver hair disheveled. This was no mortal magic. This was... She stopped, her gaze drifting to Valeraine. Something else. The succession must be established immediately, Lord Ravencroft declared, his politician's mind already calculating. Malaker's brother Draven is in the southern reaches. We need to send riders. The throne is gone, you idiot, someone shouted back. What exactly are we asking him to sit on? The arguing intensified, voices overlapping into an incomprehensible roar. Through it all, Elder Thuron remained kneeling where he'd first dropped, his lips still moving in silent prayer or incantation. His gnarled hands clutched something, a leather-bound book that Valeraine hadn't noticed before. Where had he gotten it? He hadn't been carrying anything when he'd arrived at the ceremony. Captain Drenner finally restored some semblance of order by the simple expedient of roaring silence, with enough alpha force to make even the territorial lords flinch. The hall quieted, though the undercurrent of panic remained palpable. We need to convene the High Council, Drenner said, his voice steady despite the wildness in his eyes. Immediately, in the war room, we need answers before the entire kingdom descends into anarchy. Answers? Lord Blackmere barked a bitter laugh. Answers to what? How to explain that our Alpha King was swallowed by the earth itself? How to tell our people that their queen... He stopped, his gaze flickering to where Vane had stood, where nothing remained but empty air and glowing void. We tell them the truth, Kale said quietly. Every head turned toward him. He stood beside Valeraine's bench, one hand resting on the pommel of his sword. Whatever that truth is, but first we need to understand what happened, why it happened, and his gaze moved to Valeraine. Why some were spared while others were not. The weight of dozens of eyes fell on Valeraine. She shrank back against the cold stone wall, her fingers tightening around the cup of water she still hadn't drunk. She did this, someone whispered. Valeraine couldn't see who. She's a witch, she cursed them. She was on her hands and knees when it started, another voice countered. How could she have? Enough speculation, Drenner cut them off. Elder Thuron, you're the kingdom's chief historian. Have you ever seen or read of anything like this? Thuron finally looked up from his book. His ancient face was drawn, haggard, but his eyes, those sharp, knowing eyes, blazed with a fierce intensity that seemed to age backward in the firelight. When he spoke, his voice carried despite its frailty, cutting through the nervous murmurs like a blade. I have, he said simply. In texts so old, most believe them to be myth. He rose slowly, bones creaking, and held up the leather-bound volume. Its cover was black with age, the title written in script so ancient Valerain couldn't read it. This is the Codex Terrarum, the Book of Earth's Laws. It has been in the kingdom's archives for 8 centuries, though few have bothered to study it. I brought it tonight because... He paused, his gaze distant. Because something told me I would need it. The council members exchanged uneasy glances. Captain Drenner gestured impatiently. What does it say? What happened here? Thuron moved toward the chasm, and several people gasped, reaching out as if to stop him. But the old scholar walked with confidence, stopping exactly where Valerain had knelt, where the destruction had ceased. He looked down into the glowing depths for a long moment, then back at the assembled nobles. This castle, Thuron said, his voice gaining strength, was not built on ordinary ground. We sit atop what the ancient texts call a landheart nexus, a convergence point of the Earth's deepest power. In the old days before the conquest, before the Bloodcrown dynasty, these nexus points were sacred. They were places where the spirit of the land, the consciousness of the territory itself, could manifest its will. Spirit of the land, Lord Ravencroft scoffed. That's children's tales, mythology. Is it? Thuron gestured at the chasm. You just witnessed the earth itself liquefy and swallow 2 people while leaving this entire hall otherwise intact. Do you have a better explanation? Silence. Thuron opened the codex, his fingers finding a page as if from long familiarity. The Landheart Nexus chooses its sovereign, not through bloodline, not through conquest, through resonance. The land recognizes those who are meant to protect it, who carry within them the essence of the territory itself. These individuals were called Landhearts, sovereigns blessed and bound to the earth. He looked up, his gaze sweeping across the shocked faces. For centuries, we have been told that the Bloodcrown dynasty rules by divine right, that Malakar's ancestors were chosen by the gods to lead the Northern Kingdom. But that is not entirely true. Malakar's line, he paused, choosing his words carefully, took the throne through conquest. They built this castle atop the ancient Landheart Temple, claimed the Nexus as their own, and rewrote history to legitimize their rule. You're saying Malakar was never the rightful king? Lady Ashcroft's voice trembled. I'm saying the land itself had a different opinion. Thuron's eyes were hard, and tonight it rendered judgment. The implications rippled through the crowd like a shock wave. Nobles exchanged glances ranging from horrified to calculating. If Malakar had never been legitimate, then the entire power structure of the kingdom was built on a lie. But why now? Cale asked, his tactical mind already working through the puzzle. Malakar's family has ruled for generations. Why would the land wait until tonight to act? Thuron's gaze moved to Valerain. She felt it like a physical touch, that ancient, knowing stare. Her heart began to pound, a sick dread rising in her throat. Because tonight, Thuron said softly, was the first time in 500 years that the land's true chosen was present, while a false sovereign committed an act of such profound desecration that the land could no longer remain passive. What are you saying? Valerain whispered. Her voice came out hoarse, barely audible. Thuron walked toward her, moving with a purpose that seemed to shed decades from his stooped frame. He knelt before her bench, this ancient scholar who had advised 3 kings, and looked up at her with something like reverence. When the floor liquefied, where did the destruction stop? He asked gently. At my hands. Precisely, not at some arbitrary point, not at a structural boundary. At you. He reached out slowly, as if asking permission, and took one of her hands in his. His skin was papery and cool. The land protected you. It created a barrier of solid stone beneath your body while everything around you fell into chaos. That kind of protection, that precise, intentional preservation, it only happens for one reason. Valeraine was shaking her head before he finished speaking. No, no, I'm nobody. I'm packless, I'm. You are a landheart, Thuron's voice was firm. The land recognized you, protected you, even now it responds to you. He gestured at the tiny shoot still growing from the stone where her sweat had fallen. As they watched, it grew taller, uncurling delicate leaves. When did that appear? It was after the chasm opened. I was sitting back and I was sweating and it just... She couldn't finish. Your blood, your sweat, your tears, they carry the essence of the land itself. Thuron turned to address the council, though he kept hold of Valeraine's hand. The Codex speaks of this. True landhearts can make stone fertile. They can speak to the earth. In times of great need, they can reshape the very ground beneath their feet. These abilities were thought lost when Malakar's ancestors hunted the Landheart bloodline to near extinction. Near extinction, Lady Ashcroft leaned forward. You're suggesting she's descended from. I'm suggesting that she is what Malakar's family spent 5 centuries trying to erase from history. A true sovereign, the rightful ruler of the Northern Kingdom. Thuron squeezed Valeraine's hand gently. The land has been waiting for you. Tonight, when you were degraded, when you were forced to serve as a footstool for a false queen while a false king applauded, the land felt your pain, your humiliation, and it rejected those who would desecrate its chosen. The great hall had gone completely silent. Even the crackle of torches seemed muted. Every eye was fixed on Valeraine, on the tiny plant growing from stone, on the chasm that had stopped precisely where she knelt. This is madness, Lord Blackmere finally said, but his voice lacked conviction. She's a servant girl. She was declared packless. She has no authority, no. She has the only authority that matters, Cale interrupted. His hand moved to rest on Valeraine's shoulder, protective and grounding. The land itself chose her. Do you need more proof than what you witnessed tonight? Lord Ravencroft's political instincts were already recalibrating. If this is true, and I'm not saying I accept it without further evidence, but if it's true, then we're facing a constitutional crisis unlike anything in our history. The succession laws, the territorial agreements, the trade treaties, they're all predicated on Bloodcrown legitimacy. Then perhaps, Lady Ashcroft said slowly, her sharp mind cutting through to the heart of it, we need to rewrite those laws. Perhaps we need to acknowledge that we've been following the wrong sovereign all along. You can't be serious, Lord Blackmere sputtered. She was Malakar's rejected mate, his servant, the scandal alone. The scandal is that we watched her be used as furniture and did nothing. Cale's voice was cold steel. The scandal is that we allowed cruelty to masquerade as strength. The scandal is that we failed to recognize what was right in front of us. Valeraine wanted to disappear, wanted the earth to open up and swallow her as it had Malakar, anything to escape the weight of those stares, the implications of what Thuron was saying. She couldn't be what he claimed. She was broken, packless, nothing. But even as she thought it, she felt something stir beneath her feet. A vibration, subtle but unmistakable. The marble beneath the bench warmed fractionally. And in her mind, for just a moment, she heard something that wasn't quite a voice but felt like recognition. Daughter, finally, you have returned. She gasped, jerking her hand away from Thuron's. What was that? The old scholar's smile was sad and knowing. That, my dear, was the land greeting its sovereign. You can hear it now because the nexus is fully active. The barrier that Malakar's family built to suppress its consciousness, that barrier fell when the chasm opened. He stood, bones creaking, and addressed the assembled council with formal gravity. Valeraine is a landheart, the last of her bloodline. The land has chosen her, protected her, and called to her. We can accept this truth and rebuild the kingdom on a foundation of legitimacy. Or we can reject it and watch this territory tear itself apart as the land withdraws its blessing from false rulers. How do we know she's not just lucky, someone asked weakly, that she just happened to be in the right spot when... Thuron gestured at the seedling. Make stone grow. Any of you, try. No one moved. The land speaks to her. It protected her. It grows at her touch. Thuron's voice rang with certainty. These are not coincidences. These are signs we were taught to ignore, truths we were told were myths. But the earth does not lie. It cannot lie. It simply is. Captain Drenner looked at Valeraine for a long moment, then slowly, deliberately went to one knee. If the land has chosen, then I follow. My sword is yours, Landheart. Others began to kneel, first Cale, who had never truly stopped protecting her. Then Lady Ashcroft, her pragmatic mind accepting what her eyes had witnessed. Then more guards, more servants, more nobles who had watched the impossible and could no longer deny it. But not all. Lord Blackmere remained standing, his face red with fury. Lord Ravencroft looked torn, his gaze flickering between Valeraine and the exits, calculating his options. Several others whispered urgently among themselves, already planning their next moves. Valeraine sat frozen on her bench, watching her world transform for the second time in one night. From queen to Packless. From Packless to, what? Landheart, sovereign. The words felt alien, impossible. She looked down at her hands, still dirty, still calloused from scrubbing floors. They didn't look like the hands of someone chosen by the earth itself. But when she placed her palm flat against the stone bench, she felt it. The pulse, the warmth, the vast, patient consciousness of something older than kingdoms, older than crowns, older than wolves themselves. And for the first time since Malachar had severed their bond, the hollow ache in her chest eased fractionally. The land was speaking. And against all reason, against all logic, Valeraine found herself listening. The war room had been sealed and warded. Captain Drenner stationed his most trusted guards at every entrance with orders to let no one in or out without his express permission. The territorial lords who had refused to kneel, Blackmere and 3 others, had been escorted to their quarters under armed supervision, a polite fiction that everyone understood meant house arrest. The risk of them fleeing to rally Malachar's brother Draven was too great. Inside the circular chamber, its walls lined with maps of the kingdom and territories beyond, a smaller council had gathered. Elder Thuron sat at the head of the ancient oak table, the Codex Terrarum open before him. Valeraine sat to his right, still wearing her servant's tunic, still unable to process the seismic shift her existence had undergone. Cale stood behind her chair like a sentinel. Lady Ashcroft, Captain Drenner, and 3 other council members who had accepted Thuron's revelation completed the circle. Thuron's gnarled fingers traced the ancient text as he spoke, his voice taking on the cadence of a scholar who had spent decades with these words, waiting for the moment they would finally matter. In the beginning, before the conquest, before the wars that shaped the modern territories, the land itself chose its protectors. Not through bloodshed or political maneuvering, but through resonance, a deep, fundamental connection between sovereign and soil. These were the Landhearts. He looked up, his eyes moving from face to face. They were not merely rulers, they were conduits. The land spoke through them, protected through them, thrived through them. How is that possible? Lady Ashcroft asked, her skepticism warring with what she'd witnessed in the Great Hall. The land is land, stone and soil. It's not sentient. Isn't it? Thuron's smile was thin. You've walked through a forest and felt unwelcome, even when no threat was visible. You've stood on certain ground and felt at peace for no reason you could name. You've seen crops flourish in one field and wither in another, though the soil appears identical. We dismiss these experiences as superstition or coincidence. But what if they're not? What if the land has always been aware, simply waiting for those who can hear it? He turned a page in the codex, revealing an illustration that made Valeraine's breath catch. It showed a woman with long hair standing at the center of a circle of stones. From her outstretched hands, vines and roots erupted, spreading across the page in intricate patterns. Her eyes were closed, her expression serene. The first Landhearts could do impossible things, make deserts bloom, turn stone to fertile ground, calm earthquakes, redirect rivers, but these abilities came with a burden. They felt every wound to the land as if it were inflicted on their own bodies. The pain of a forest burned, the ache of a poisoned stream. They were protectors because they had no choice. The land's suffering was their suffering. And Malachar's ancestors? Cale asked, his hand resting on the back of Valeraine's chair. What happened to them? Thuron's expression darkened. 500 years ago, during the Continental Wars, a warlord named Kaelin Bloodcrown saw an opportunity. The landheart of the Northern Kingdom, a queen named Myrthea, had exhausted herself, ending a drought that would have killed thousands. She was weak, vulnerable. Kaelin struck during a peace summit, murdered her and her entire family, and claimed the throne by right of conquest. But if the land chooses its sovereigns, why didn't it stop him? Lady Ashcroft leaned forward. Because Myrthea was already dead, and her heirs were slaughtered before they could claim their inheritance. The land's consciousness is vast but slow. By the time it understood what had happened, Kaelin had already built the obsidian castle atop the Landheart Temple, had already woven blood wards into the foundation to suppress the Nexus's power. Thuron's voice was heavy with old sorrow. He couldn't destroy the connection entirely. You can't kill the land itself, but he could muffle it, bury it. Make people forget it ever existed. For 500 years, Captain Drenner sounded skeptical. Kaelin was thorough. He systematically hunted down anyone with Landheart blood, anyone who might challenge his claim. He burned the old texts, killed the scholars who remembered. Within 2 generations, the Landheart dynasty had become myth. Within 5, even the myths were forgotten. Thuron closed the codex gently, his hand lingering on its worn cover. Except by a very few of us who kept the old knowledge alive, waiting for a sign that a true heir might have survived. All eyes turned to Valeraine. She felt the weight of their stares and wanted to shrink into her chair to disappear. "I can't be," she whispered. I knew my parents. They were ordinary. My father was a counselor, my mother was." "Where are they now?" Thuron asked gently. The question hit like a blade to the ribs. "They died. When I was 16, a hunting accident in the Whispering Woods." "Both of them, at the same time." Thuron's knowing look made her stomach clench. "The report said a rogue bear, that they were in the wrong place at the wrong time." But even as she said it, doubt crept in. She'd always thought it strange that her father, an experienced woodsman, would have been caught unprepared, that both her parents would fall to the same animal. "I suspect," Thuron said carefully, "that if we examined the circumstances of their deaths more closely, we would find inconsistencies. Questions left unanswered. Your parents, or whoever raised you, were likely Landheart sympathizers, hiding the last heir of Myrthea's bloodline. When someone discovered the truth, they eliminated the threat." "Malachor," Kael said, his voice flat. "He would have been young then, newly crowned, still consolidating power." Thuron nodded slowly. "It's possible. Or his father, the previous king. The Bloodcrown line has always been paranoid about threats to their legitimacy. They would have had scholars searching for any surviving Landhearts, any bloodline that could challenge their rule." Valeraine felt dizzy. Her entire childhood, recontextualized. Every memory now suspect. Had her parents loved her, or had they been guardians? Had their deaths been murder disguised as accident? And if Malachor had ordered it or known of it? The mate bond. He'd claimed her as his fated mate when she was barely 18, fresh from grief and alone in the world. "He knew," she breathed, horror dawning cold and certain. "Malachor knew what I was. That's why he took me as his mate, not because of any bond, but to control me, to keep the last Landheart under his thumb. And when you proved too strong-willed, too competent, too well-loved by the people," Lady Ashcroft's political mind completed the thought, "he couldn't kill you outright without raising questions, so he destroyed you another way, made you packless, reduced you to nothing." "But he made a fatal mistake," Thuron said. "He humiliated you on the Landheart Nexus itself, in the one place where the land's consciousness is strongest, where it could bear witness to his cruelty. And tonight, when Vane literally stepped on you, used your body as an object, that desecration was too much. The land broke through 5 centuries of suppression and rendered judgment." Valeraine's hands were shaking. She pressed them flat against the table, trying to ground herself. "I need proof. I need more than stories and theories. How do we know I'm truly?" "We test it," Thuron said simply. He reached into his robes and withdrew a small silver knife, its blade etched with runes. "The Codex describes several ways to identify a Landheart. The most definitive is blood." He stood and moved around the table to stand beside her. "May I?" Valeraine looked up at him, at the certainty in his ancient eyes, and slowly extended her hand palm up. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Thuron took her hand with surprising gentleness. "This will hurt, but only for a moment." He pressed the blade against her palm and drew it across in one swift motion. The cut was shallow but clean. Blood welled up immediately, pooling in her cupped palm. In the torchlight, it looked ordinary, dark red, warm, human. Thuron guided her hand toward the oak table. "Let it fall on wood first." 3 drops fell onto the ancient table. They sat there for a heartbeat, looking like nothing more than blood. Then they began to shimmer, taking on an iridescent quality like oil on water. The wood beneath them darkened, not with staining but with saturation, as if the table were drinking the blood down into its grain. "Now stone," Thuron said, his voice tight with anticipation. He led her to the wall, where ancient river stones had been mortared together centuries ago. Valeraine pressed her bleeding palm against the rough surface. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the blood didn't just stain, it moved. Thin tendrils of crimson spread across the stone face like living roots, seeking purchase, burrowing into microscopic cracks. Where the blood touched, the stone warmed. Valeraine felt it through her palm, a pulse of heat that seemed to answer her own heartbeat. And then it happened. A crack appeared in the mortar between stones. Not a destructive fracture, but a purposeful split. From that crack, a tiny green shoot emerged, impossibly delicate, impossibly alive. It uncurled in fast motion, growing before their eyes, sprouting leaves the size of her thumbnail. Within seconds, it had become a small vine, its tendrils wrapping gently around her wrist like a greeting. "Merciful ancestors," Captain Drenner breathed. The plant continued to grow, spreading across the wall in intricate patterns. Wherever Valeraine's blood had touched, new shoots emerged. In less than a minute, a portion of the stone wall had become a living garden, vibrant and green and utterly impossible. Valeraine stared at it, her breath coming in short gasps. The plant's tendrils felt warm against her skin, not constraining but welcoming. And in her mind, that not-quite voice spoke again, clearer this time. "Home, you carry home within you. We have waited so long." She jerked her hand back, and the growth stopped immediately. The vines remained, vital and green, but ceased their expansion the instant she broke contact. "How?" She couldn't form a complete question. "Your blood carries the essence of the land," Thuron said, his voice shaking with emotion. "Not metaphorically, literally. You are part of it and it is part of you. This is what the Blood Crown dynasty tried to erase from history. This is what they feared." Lady Ashcroft approached the wall slowly, reaching out to touch one of the leaves. It was solid, real, warm with life. "All this time," she murmured. "The stories of Myrthia's garden, how she could make flowers bloom in midwinter, we thought they were exaggerations. Propaganda." "They were truth," Thuron said. "Carefully buried truth." Valeraine's mind was reeling, fragments of memory suddenly taking on new significance. She remembered being a child, no more than 5 or 6, crying in the garden after a nightmare. Her mother had found her there at dawn, surrounded by night-blooming flowers that shouldn't have been in season. Her mother had gone very still, very pale, then gathered her up and whispered urgently, "You must never tell anyone about this. Promise me, Valeraine, never." She remembered at 10, falling and scraping her knee badly on loose stone. Her father had carried her inside, but when he returned to clear the stone away, it had somehow embedded itself back into the path, flush and smooth as if it had never been disturbed. She remembered at 14, having a terrible argument with her mother over something trivial. She'd run to her room in tears, and when she emerged hours later, her mother had stared at her strangely. Later, Valeraine had discovered that all the potted plants in her room had grown wildly, their roots cracking their containers. "The signs were always there," she whispered. "I just didn't see them." "Your parents worked very hard to help you not see them," Thuron said gently. "They were protecting you. If the Blood Crown line discovered a Landheart heir who was manifesting abilities, they would have killed me immediately." The certainty of it settled in her bones like ice. "Instead, Malachar claimed you," Cale said, his voice tight with barely controlled fury. Bound you to him through the mate bond, kept you close and controlled, made you doubt yourself, made you think you were weak and useless. He systematically destroyed your confidence so you would never realize what you were capable of. The pieces fell into place with horrible clarity. Every time she'd suggested policy changes that would strengthen the common people's connection to the land, crop rotation, forest preservation, sustainable hunting, Malachar had dismissed her as naive and soft. Every time she'd tried to institute programs that would have repaired environmental damage, he'd called her wasteful and emotional. He'd been afraid, not of her politically, but fundamentally. Afraid that if she connected too deeply with the land, if she spent too much time in nature or among growing things, she might accidentally awaken her dormant abilities. The mate bond, Valeraine said slowly. It wasn't real, was it? He manufactured it somehow. Thuron's expression was grave. The Codex mentions blood wards that can create false mate bonds, artificial connections that feel real but are actually binding chains. It's dark magic, forbidden for obvious reasons. But if Malachar discovered you were a landheart, he might have used such a ward to ensure you were bound to him, unable to leave or challenge him. That's why it felt wrong, she whispered. Why I always felt like something was missing, like we were going through the motions of a bond without the actual connection. I thought it was me, that I was broken somehow. You were never broken, Cale said fiercely. He was. And when he severed it, Lady Ashcroft added, her analytical mind working through the implications. When he publicly rejected you and declared you packless, he thought he was destroying you completely. Making you so low, so powerless, that even if you discovered your heritage, you'd be too beaten down to do anything about it. But he miscalculated, Thuron said, a grim satisfaction in his voice. He performed his ultimate act of desecration on the Landheart Nexus itself, in the one place where the land's consciousness could fully witness his cruelty. He didn't just reject you, he committed cosmic blasphemy. He took the land's chosen sovereign and reduced her to furniture, used her body as an object for his false queen to step upon. The full horror of it settled over the room. This wasn't just political brutality or personal cruelty. It was a fundamental violation of the natural order, a desecration so profound that the earth itself had been forced to intervene. The land couldn't save you from the abuse, Thuron continued. The blood wards on the castle suppressed its ability to act directly. But tonight, in that moment when Vane's weight pressed down on your spine, the sheer wrongness of it, the complete inversion of rightful order, it broke through 5 centuries of binding. And it rendered judgment. Valeraine looked down at her still bleeding palm, at the blood that could make stone bear life. What does this mean for me? What am I supposed to do? That depends, Lady Ashcroft said carefully, on what you want. The land has chosen you, but you still have agency. You could walk away from this, refuse the burden. And go where? Valeraine's laugh was bitter. I'm packless, remember. I have no territory, no pack, nowhere to go. You're not packless, Cale said firmly. You never were. Malachar's declaration was built on lies. You're the rightful sovereign of the Northern Kingdom, heir to a dynasty that predates his by millennia. But I don't know how to be that, Valeraine said, panic rising in her chest. I don't know how to use these abilities. I don't know how to rule. I can barely keep myself together, let alone. Thuron placed a weathered hand over hers, careful to avoid the still bleeding cut. The land will teach you. It's already speaking to you, isn't it? You heard it in the Great Hall. You hear it now. She did, a constant, gentle presence at the edges of her consciousness, patient and vast and impossibly old. It felt like bedrock beneath her feet, like the deep roots of ancient trees, like the slow grinding of continents. It felt like home. Your weakness was never weakness, Thuron said softly. It was restraint. You were holding back power you didn't even know you possessed. Imagine what you could do if you stopped holding back, if you let the land flow through you fully. I could reshape continents, Valeraine whispered, remembering the illustration in the Codex. I could move mountains, redirect rivers, end droughts or cause floods. The scope of it was terrifying. Yes, Thuron said. And that's precisely why the Bloodcrown line feared you. Why they spent 500 years trying to erase your bloodline from existence. Because true landhearts don't rule through force or fear. They rule through connection, through service to the land itself. And a sovereign like that, one who genuinely cares for the people and the earth, is far more dangerous to tyrants than any army. Valeraine looked around the table at the faces watching her, waiting for her. Lady Ashcroft with her calculating gaze, Captain Drenner with his soldier's loyalty, Cale with his unwavering protection, and Thuron, who had spent his entire life preserving forbidden knowledge for this exact moment. Malachar didn't just reject his mate, she said slowly, the full weight of understanding finally settling on her shoulders. He rejected the land itself. He spit in the face of something sacred and ancient, something his family had been suppressing for centuries. And the land. She looked down at the vines growing from the wall, at the blood that had become roots. The land remembered, and it took back what was stolen. Yes, Thuron said simply. Valeraine stood, her legs unsteady but holding. The cut on her palm had already begun to heal, knitting together with impossible speed. She walked to the window and looked out over the kingdom, her kingdom if she claimed it. The moon was rising over the northern mountains, painting everything in silver light. In the distance, she could see the whispering woods where her parents had died. The forests they'd walked through on peaceful mornings, teaching her the names of every plant and tree. Had they known what she was? Had they been preparing her for this in their quiet way? Behind her, Thuron spoke one more time. The question isn't whether you're a landheart, Valeraine. The land has already answered that. The question is whether you'll accept what you are, whether you'll let the land teach you what you were always meant to become. Valeraine pressed her palm against the cold window glass. Where her skin touched, warmth spread, and for just a moment, she could have sworn she saw tiny frost flowers bloom in intricate patterns across the surface. The land was waiting. And for the first time in her life, Valeraine stopped running from what she was. Teach me, she said to the patient presence in her mind. Show me what I need to know. And the earth, delighted, began to sing. 3 days after the earth swallowed a king, riders approached from the south. Valeraine stood in what remained of the great hall, staring down into the chasm that had become the kingdom's open wound. The magma glow had faded to a dull red pulse, like a heartbeat visible from the deep. Workers had erected barriers around the perimeter, but no one had dared attempt to fill it or bridge it. Something about the chasm felt permanent, intentional, a scar meant to remain. She'd spent the past 3 days in the archives with Thuron, poring over the Codex Terrarum and other recovered texts, learning the old language, practicing small manipulations, making seeds sprout, coaxing warmth from stone. Every exercise left her exhausted and exhilarated in equal measure. The land's voice in her mind had grown clearer, more distinct, though she still couldn't always understand what it was trying to tell her. But she was learning, slowly. My lady, Captain Drenner appeared at the hall's entrance, his expression grim. The southern delegation has arrived. Draven Bloodcrown is demanding immediate audience with the High Council. Valeraine's stomach clenched. She'd known this was coming. Malachar's younger brother had been in the southern reaches negotiating trade agreements when the chasm opened. It had taken 3 days for word to reach him, and 3 more for him to make the journey north. How many did he bring? 200 soldiers, all armed, all wearing Bloodcrown colors. Drenner's hand rested on his sword hilt. He's not here to negotiate. Assemble the council, Valeraine said, trying to project a confidence she didn't feel. We'll receive him formally. She'd spent the past 3 days wearing borrowed gowns from Lady Ashcroft's wardrobe, clothing that fit poorly and felt foreign after weeks in servants' tunics. Today she wore deep forest green, the color of the old Landheart dynasty according to Thuron. The fabric was fine but simple, lacking the ostentatious display Malachar had preferred. Around her throat, she wore the only jewelry Thuron had been able to recover from the hidden archives, a pendant of carved wood set with a single green stone. The seal of the Landheart line. It felt like armor and target simultaneously. The council chamber had been hastily prepared. A temporary throne, a simple chair of carved oak, had been placed where the head of the table usually sat. It wasn't the obsidian throne, couldn't be, but it served the necessary function. Valeraine took her seat, Kale standing to her right, Thuron to her left. Lady Ashcroft, Captain Drenner, and 6 other council members filled the remaining seats. The 2 empty chairs at the far end felt accusatory. The doors opened with a bang. Draven Bloodcrown strode in like a man who owned the room. He was shorter than Malachar had been but built broader, with the same midnight hair and predatory features. His eyes swept the chamber, dismissing most of those present, before landing on Valeraine with barely concealed disdain. "Where is my brother?" His voice boomed, designed to dominate. "Where is the king?" Behind him, 3 men in expensive armor filed in, his personal guard. And bringing up the rear, a woman in black silk who could only be Seraphine. She had Vane's aristocratic beauty, but with harder edges, her eyes calculating as they took in the room's occupants. "Lord Draven," Lady Ashcroft began, her voice diplomatic. "We sent detailed reports. Surely you've been informed." "I've been informed of nonsense and hysteria," Draven cut her off. "Wild tales of the earth opening up, of my brother being murdered by magic. I want facts, not fairy stories." "Then come with me," Valeraine said quietly, standing. "I'll show you facts." She led the southern delegation to the great hall, to the edge of the chasm. The barriers had been pulled aside for this purpose. Draven approached the precipice slowly, his swagger faltering as he looked down into the glowing depths. "7 hells," one of his guards breathed. "This is where your brother stood 3 nights ago," Valeraine said, her voice steady despite her hammering heart. "This is where he applauded while his chosen mate used my body as a step to reach the throne. This is where the land rendered judgment." Draven's face had gone pale, but he recovered quickly, his politician's mask sliding back into place. "A sinkhole, a geological anomaly. Tragic, certainly, but hardly." "The destruction stopped precisely at my hands," Valeraine interrupted, pointing to where she'd knelt. "The stone beneath me remained solid while everything around it liquefied. That's not a geological anomaly. That's intention." "Convenient," Seraphine spoke for the first time, her voice like cut glass. "My cousin dies in a mysterious accident, and suddenly the rejected servant claims divine right. Forgive me if I find that suspicious." "The land chose," Thuron began. "The land is dirt and rock," Draven snapped, rounding on the old scholar. "It doesn't choose anything. What I see here is a tragedy being exploited for political gain." He turned to face the assembled council members who had followed them to the hall. "Under the clear laws of succession, as Malachar's closest living male relative, I claim the throne of the Northern Kingdom." "The throne no longer exists," Kale said flatly, gesturing to the chasm. "It was swallowed along with your brother." "Then a new throne will be commissioned. The point stands, I am the legitimate heir." Draven's gaze swept the room, looking for support. Several of the nobles who hadn't knelt to Valeraine shifted uncomfortably. "Lord Blackmere has already pledged support to Draven's claim," one of them ventured. "As have the Eastern Territories who weren't present for the incident." "Because they didn't witness the truth," Lady Ashcroft said sharply. "Those of us who were here saw." "Saw what you've been told to see," Seraphine interrupted smoothly. "Mass hysteria. Panic. In moments of crisis, people see what they expect or fear, not what actually occurs." "I'm not interested in debates," Draven declared. "The succession laws are clear. Noble blood passes to noble blood. I am Malachar's heir, and I claim what is mine by right." He looked at Valeraine with barely veiled contempt. "You were declared packless by my brother. That status remains. You have no legal standing here." "She has the only standing that matters," Kale said, his voice dangerously quiet. "The land itself." "Superstition," Draven dismissed. "Old wives' tales the desperate cling to. Ideal in law and order, not mythology." "Then prove you're right," Thuron said. The old scholar moved forward, his ancient eyes blazing with challenge. "You claim succession. Very well. We've commissioned a temporary throne in the council chamber. Sit upon it. Let the land judge your claim." Draven's confidence didn't waver. "Gladly." They returned to the council chamber. The simple oak throne sat waiting, innocuous in the torchlight. Draven approached it without hesitation, his guards flanking him. He turned to face the assembled council, a triumphant smirk already forming. "Behold your rightful king," he announced and sat down. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then a sharp crack split the air. The oak chair shuddered. A fracture line appeared in the right armrest, spreading with visible speed. The seat itself began to splinter, hairline cracks racing across its surface like lightning. Draven leaped up with a curse as the chair collapsed beneath him, falling apart into jagged pieces. He stumbled backward, his guards catching him before he fell. The room erupted in shocked murmurs. "Cheap craftsmanship," Draven spat, but his face had gone ashen. "Sabotage." "That chair was carved from a 200-year-old oak by our master carpenter," Captain Drenner said coldly. "It was structurally sound this morning. I tested it myself." "The land rejects false rulers," Thuron said, and there was no triumph in his voice, only sadness. "It has been doing so for 500 years, but the blood wards your family placed on this castle suppressed its voice. Those wards fell when the chasm opened. Now the land can speak clearly, and it does not recognize your claim." "This is absurd," Seraphine's composure cracked. "You're using parlor tricks and coincidence to deny legitimate succession. The Blood Crown line has ruled for 5 centuries. "Through force and suppression," Lady Ashcroft said. "Through burying the truth about the Landhart dynasty. Through hunting down the rightful rulers and claiming their power as your own." "Lies," Draven snarled. "Historical revisionism to support a coup." "Then explain the chasm," Kale challenged, stepping forward. "Explain how it opened the moment your brother desecrated a Landhart. Explain how it stopped precisely at Valoraine's hands. Explain how plants grow from stone where her blood touches. Explain how every chair you try to sit on will reject you because the land itself knows you're false." The two men locked eyes, and Valorayne saw murder in Draven's gaze. He was cornered, his claim crumbling, and cornered predators were the most dangerous. "I have 200 soldiers outside this castle," Draven said softly, his hand moving to his sword. "You have what? 50 guards, perhaps 100 if you arm the servants." His smile was cruel. "I don't need the land's approval. I'll take what's mine by the same method my ancestors did, through force." "And if you do," Thuron said quietly, "the land will reject you as violently as it rejected Malachar. You'll rule over a dying kingdom. Crops will fail. Water will turn foul. The earth itself will work against you. You cannot force legitimacy at swordpoint, not here, not on a Landhart nexus." "Watch me," Draven growled. "There's another way," Seraphine interjected, her calculating mind already adapting. "A compromise. Valorayne clearly has some unusual connection to this place. Very well, let her marry Draven, combine the bloodlines. He brings legitimacy through succession law, she brings this supposed earth magic. Together they rule and no one needs to die." The suggestion landed like a stone in still water. Several council members looked thoughtful, seeing the political elegance of it. Valorayne's stomach turned. "I will not." "It's a practical solution," Lord Ravencroft ventured. "It would prevent civil war, unite the competing claims." "I would rather die," Valorayne said flatly, and felt the ground beneath the castle rumble in agreement. Cracks appeared in the council chamber floor, spreading outward from where she stood. "I was forced into one false bond. I will not accept another." "Then you condemn this kingdom to war," Draven said. "My soldiers will take this castle. They'll burn every record of your supposed Landhart heritage. And when I'm done, there won't be enough of you left to bury." "No," Kale said, stepping directly between Draven and Valorayne. "There won't be war, because we're going to settle this the old way. The way disputes were settled before the conquest, through trial by ordeal." The room went silent. "What are you suggesting?" Lady Ashcroft asked carefully. Kale turned to Thuron. "The Codex mentions tests for Landharts, trials to prove their connection to the earth. If Valorayne passes these tests in front of witnesses, her claim becomes undeniable. Even those who doubt will have to acknowledge the truth." "And if she fails?" Draven asked, but there was unease in his voice now. Then you can claim the throne, and the land will have to accept you. Cale's gaze moved to Valeraine. But she won't fail. Thuron was nodding slowly, his fingers steepling. There is one test, the greatest test. The Codex speaks of the Crown of Roots, an artifact that appears only for true landhearts, only when the Nexus is fully active. It's said to rest in the heart of the earth itself, in the deepest places where the land's consciousness is strongest. His eyes moved to the Great Hall, to the chasm still glowing in the distance. If Valeraine descends into that abyss, reaches the heart of the Nexus, and returns wearing the Crown of Roots, then no one, not Draven, not the Eastern Territories, not anyone, can dispute her right. The land itself will have crowned her. And if she can't, Draven pressed, smelling opportunity, if she falls or fails to find this supposed crown, then her claim dies with her, Thuron said heavily, and you may rule as you wish. No, Cale started to object, but Valeraine placed a hand on his arm. Yes, she said quietly. The idea terrified her, but it also felt right, inevitable. The land had been calling her toward that chasm since it opened. I'll do it, I'll descend. This is madness, Lady Ashcroft protested. We don't know what's down there, the heat alone. Will not harm her, Thuron said with conviction. She is Landheart, the earth will protect its own. He looked at Valeraine, his ancient eyes suddenly young with hope. But you must go alone. No guards, no allies. This is between you and the land. Do you understand? Valeraine nodded, her throat too tight for words. When? Draven demanded. Tonight, Valeraine said. At moonrise, gather whoever you wish as witnesses. I'll prove my right before the entire kingdom if necessary. Draven's smile was sharp. I'll be there, and when you fail, I'll be the one wearing a crown. He swept out, Seraphine and his guards following. The council chamber erupted in urgent debate the moment the doors closed. Cale turned to Valeraine, his expression stricken. You can't do this, it's a death sentence. That chasm is mine, Valeraine finished softly. She could feel it calling, a pull in her chest where the false mate bond used to sit. The land is calling me home, Cale. I have to answer. Then I'm going with you. You can't. You heard Thuron. I have to go alone. I don't care what. Cale. She took his hands in hers, feeling the calluses from his sword, the warmth of his steady presence. I need you here. If I don't come back, you need to evacuate the castle. Get the people to safety before Draven burns everything. Promise me. He looked like he wanted to argue, but finally nodded. I promise, but you're coming back, you have to. I will, she said, and hoped it wasn't a lie. The land has spoken, she heard Cale say to the remaining council members, his voice carrying through the chamber with absolute conviction. It opened the earth and swallowed false rulers. It protected its chosen even when she was at her lowest. Now it calls her home to claim what was always hers. We follow the true sovereign, or we fall into that chasm ourselves. There is no middle ground, not anymore. Valeraine looked toward the great hall, toward the glowing wound in the earth where a throne had once stood. Somewhere in those depths, past fire and shadow, the crown of roots was waiting. And the land was singing her name. Moonrise came too quickly. The great hall had been transformed. Hundreds of candles lined the edges of the chasm, their flames casting dancing shadows across the gathered crowd. Draven stood at the forefront with his soldiers, arms crossed, watching with barely concealed anticipation. Seraphine lingered beside him, her expression calculating. Behind them, nobles and common folk alike had packed into the hall, some out of duty, others out of morbid curiosity, but all sharing the same tension that electrified the air. Valeraine stood at the precipice's edge, looking down into depths that glowed with more than just magma light. There was something else down there now, a pulsing luminescence that shifted between green and gold, like sunlight filtering through ancient leaves. The heat rising from below should have been unbearable, but against her skin it felt merely warm, almost welcoming. She wore the simplest dress they could find, undyed linen the color of raw silk, belted with braided leather. No jewelry except the Landheart pendant. No shoes. Thuron had been adamant about that. The land must feel your skin, he'd said. You must be unarmored, vulnerable. Only then will it judge you truly. Kale appeared at her side for the 10th time, his jaw tight with suppressed fear. There's still time to call this off. Find another way. There is no other way. She turned to face him, memorizing his features in the candlelight, the scar above his left eyebrow, the stubborn set of his mouth, the fierce protectiveness in his dark eyes. This was always where I was meant to go. I've been running from it my whole life. Then let me come with you. Let me. Kale, she placed her hand on his chest, feeling his heart hammering beneath. I need to know you're here, that if I look up I'll see you waiting. Can you give me that? He closed his eyes, warring with himself. Finally, he covered her hand with his. I'll be here. I'll wait as long as it takes. Even if it takes forever. Especially then. She rose on her toes and kissed his cheek, feeling him tense with surprise. Thank you for seeing me when no one else did. Before he could respond, she turned away and approached the edge. Elder Thuron waited there, the Codex Terrarum open in his hands. The descent is both trial and transformation, he said quietly, for her ears alone. The land will test your courage, your worthiness, your intentions. It will show you visions of past pain, force you to confront what was done to you. But it will also show you what could be, what you could become. He looked up from the ancient text, his eyes bright with unshed tears. The crown of roots appears only for those the land deems worthy not just of power, but of wisdom. Not everyone who descends returns. But those who do, he trailed off, unable to finish. I understand, Valeraine said, though she wasn't sure she did. Thuron pressed something into her palm, a small, smooth stone, warm to the touch. A piece of the old Landheart temple. It's been in my family for generations, waiting for this moment. Keep it close. It will help you remember who you are when the visions try to make you forget. She closed her fingers around it, feeling its solid weight. How do I begin? You simply step forward. The land will do the rest. Valeraine turned to face the assembled crowd. Hundreds of faces stared back, some hopeful, some skeptical, some openly hostile. Draven's smirk was particularly infuriating. I, Valeraine, last daughter of the Landheart bloodline, accept the trial of the crown of roots. Her voice carried through the hall, stronger than she'd expected. I descend not to claim power, but to discover truth. If I am worthy, I will return. If I am not. She let the sentence hang, unfinished. Then she stepped off the edge. For one heart-stopping moment, there was only empty air and the certainty of falling. Gasps erupted from the crowd. Kale lunged forward with a shout. But Valeraine didn't fall. The stone wall of the chasm rippled like water beneath her feet, forming a ledge that caught her weight. It solidified the instant her bare soles touched it, warm and textured like sun-heated rock. Another ledge appeared below and to the left, a perfect stepping stone. The land was building her a staircase. Valeraine began to descend, each step appearing just as she needed it. The walls weren't static. They flowed and reformed around her passage, organic and responsive. She placed her hand against the stone for balance, and it warmed beneath her touch, pulsing with that not-quite voice she was learning to understand. Daughter, come home, come down, come deep. Behind and above her, the voices of the crowd faded to distant echoes. The candlelight dimmed. She was descending into a space between worlds, where stone breathed and fire sang. The first vision hit her without warning. Suddenly, she wasn't on the chasm wall, but back in the Great Hall 3 days ago, on her hands and knees with veins stiletto pressed against her spine. She could feel the weight, the sharp pressure, the humiliation burning through her like acid. But this time she couldn't look away, couldn't retreat into numbness. The vision forced her to feel everything, every eye watching, every snicker from the crowd, every ounce of Malaker's contempt as he applauded. This is what you were, a voice echoed through her mind, not the land's gentle presence, but something harsher, testing. This is what they made you, furniture, an object, nothing. Valeraine's breath came in ragged gasps. The stone beneath her feet felt suddenly precarious, as if it might dissolve and drop her into fire. No, she whispered. That's not what I was, that's what they tried to make me. The vision shifted. Now she was scrubbing floors in the Queen's solar, hands raw and bleeding, wearing the rough gray tunic of a servant. Vane stood over her, beautiful and cruel, dropping ash from her cigarette onto the section Valeraine had just cleaned. Again, Vane's voice dripped poison. Do it again, and this time show proper gratitude for being allowed to serve. Rage erupted in Valeraine's chest, hot and righteous. This is what you let them do to you, the testing voice accused. You could have fought, could have fled. Instead you knelt, you served, you accepted degradation. I survived, Valeraine shot back, her voice stronger now. I endured because I had to, because running would have meant death. There's no shame in choosing life. The vision shattered. She was back on the stone staircase, descending deeper. The glow from below was brighter now, more insistent. Sweat beaded on her forehead, not from heat, but from the intensity of the visions. She gripped Thuron's stone tighter, using it as an anchor. The second vision rose up like a wave. This time she saw her parents, her father with his kind eyes and calloused hands, her mother with her nervous smile and constant vigilance. But she was seeing them differently now, through the lens of truth. Every warning to hide her abilities. Every time they'd moved home suddenly without explanation. The way they'd always kept her away from the capital, away from Malaker's court. And then the memory she'd buried deepest, the night they died. She'd been 16, staying with a friend in the village while they traveled to the Whispering Woods for what they'd called a diplomatic meeting. But in this vision, enhanced by the land's memory, she saw what really happened. Her parents meeting with hooded figures in a moonlit clearing. The figures attacking without warning. Her father's desperate defense. Her mother's scream as silver blades found their marks. And watching from the shadows, giving orders, a younger Malaker, his face cold and calculating. He killed them, Valeraine breathed, tears streaming down her face. He knew what I was, so he killed them and took me for himself, to control me, to keep the last Landheart under his thumb. Yes, the testing voice confirmed. He murdered your parents and bound you to him with false magic. He used you, degraded you, and when you were no longer useful, he tried to erase you. He deserves no mercy. He deserves. He's already dead, Valeraine interrupted. The land judged him, it's done. But his brother lives. His allies thrive. His legacy poisons the kingdom. You could purge it all. The land would help you. Every stone in every castle that bears the Bloodcrown name could liquefy at your command. Every soldier who supported them could sink into the earth. You could reshape this kingdom through fire and vengeance. You could make them all pay for what was done to you. The offer hung in the air, seductive and terrible. Valeraine could feel the land's power thrumming beneath her feet, waiting to be unleashed. She could imagine it, the satisfaction of watching Draven fall, of seeing fear in the eyes of every noble who'd ignored her suffering. The sweet, terrible justice of it. The stone staircase, beneath her began a crack. No, she whispered, then louder. No, that's not who I am. It could be. You've earned the right to rage, to destroy. I've earned the right to choose, Valeraine said fiercely. And I choose differently. I choose to be better than what was done to me. The cracking stopped. The staircase solidified, stronger than before. The vision released her. She was gasping, tears streaming freely now, but still descending. The glow below was nearly blinding, a radiance that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. The heat had transformed from uncomfortable to purifying, burning away pretense and fear until only essential truth remained. One more vision rose, the worst one. She saw herself as Malaker must have seen her, weak, forgettable, easily controlled, a tool to be used and discarded. She watched herself accept his lies, believe his cruelties were deserved, shrink herself down to fit his narrative of her worthlessness. She saw every moment she doubted herself, every time she'd apologized for existing, every instant of self-erasure. This is your legacy, the testing voice said, but it was gentler now, almost sad. This is the damage that was done. You carry these wounds. They've shaped you, twisted you. Can you rule carrying such scars? Can you lead when you've been so thoroughly broken? Valeraine stopped on the staircase, her bare feet planted on warm stone. She looked at the vision of her broken self with clear eyes. Yes, she said simply, because those scars taught me empathy. They taught me that strength isn't the absence of pain, but the refusal to let pain define you. They taught me that the lowest among us, the servants, the packless, the forgotten, deserve dignity and protection. Malachar broke me, and in the breaking, he created exactly what he feared most. Someone who understands both power and powerlessness. Someone who will never forget what it's like to be crushed beneath someone else's heel. The vision dissolved into light. The testing voice spoke one final time, and now it was unmistakably the land itself, vast and ancient and approving. Will you rule with vengeance or renewal, daughter? Choose carefully. This choice will shape centuries. I choose renewal, Valeraine said without hesitation. I choose to build something better than what came before, not because I'm weak or forgiving, but because vengeance is a poison that kills the bearer. I'll hold people accountable, yes. I'll demand justice, but I won't become the thing I'm trying to destroy. The stone beneath her feet began to glow. Light erupted from every crack and crevice in the chasm walls, brilliant and green gold. The staircase transformed, each step blooming with tiny flowers, impossibly delicate blooms in shades of white and gold that filled the air with a scent like spring rain and wild honey. You are worthy, the land sang. You have passed through pain and chosen grace. Descend, daughter, claim what was always yours. The final steps appeared, leading down to a platform of smooth black stone surrounded by flowing magma that didn't burn. And there, at the platform's center, resting on a pedestal of living wood that grew from the stone itself, was the crown of roots. It was nothing like the heavy gold crowns Malachar had worn. It was alive, a circlet woven from golden vines that pulsed with inner light, studded with flowers that bloomed and closed in a hypnotic rhythm. Tiny leaves of green gold rustled though there was no wind. It wasn't ostentatious or heavy with gems. It was organic, growing, a piece of the living earth itself. Valeraine stepped onto the platform. The heat here should have been unbearable. She stood surrounded by molten rock in the heart of the earth itself. But she felt only warmth, only welcome. She approached the crown of roots slowly, reverently. As she drew close, the flowers opened wider and she heard them, actually heard them, singing in tiny, crystalline voices. A harmony older than language, the earth's joy made audible. She reached out with trembling hands. The moment her fingers touched the vines, they moved, twinning around her wrists gently, questioning. Images flooded her mind, not visions of pain this time, but of possibility. She saw the kingdom healed, forests replanted, rivers running clear. She saw children playing on ground that would never betray them, crops growing in soil enriched by landheart magic. She saw a future where the powerful served rather than dominated, where strength was measured in what you built, not what you destroyed. But she also saw the cost, the loneliness of being different, the burden of feeling every wound the land suffered, the impossible decisions between mercy and justice, the weight of centuries of expectation. You will carry this burden alone, the land warned gently. No mate, no partner can truly share it. The crown of roots crowns only the singular. Do you accept? Valeraine thought of Kale waiting above, of the life she might have had, simpler, easier, less terrifying. Then she thought of every person who'd suffered under the blood-crown tyranny, every voice that had been silenced, every injustice that had gone unanswered. Not alone, she whispered to the crown. I'll have the land, I'll have my people, and I'll have the truth, that's enough. Then rise, Landheart, rise and be crowned. Valeraine lifted the crown of roots from its pedestal. The vines released her wrists and settled gently onto her head, warm and alive. They adjusted themselves, growing and shifting to fit perfectly, until she couldn't tell where the crown ended and she began. Power flooded through her, not overwhelming, but clarifying. She felt every stone in the castle above, every root in every tree for miles, every vein of ore deep in the earth. The land's consciousness merged with hers, vast and patient and utterly certain. She looked up. The chasm stretched above her, impossibly tall, its walls glowing with her light. At the distant top, she could barely make out faces peering down, tiny figures backlit by candles. Take me home, she whispered to the land. The stone walls rippled in response. A platform of rock rose beneath her feet, lifting her smoothly and steadily toward the surface. As she ascended, flowers bloomed in her wake. Every ledge she passed, every handhold she'd used on the way down suddenly erupted with life. The entire chasm was transforming into a vertical garden, a testament to what had occurred in its depths. The faces above grew larger, more distinct. She could see shock, awe, fear. Draven had stepped back from the edge, his face ashen. Seraphine's hand was pressed to her mouth. And Kale was on his knees at the precipice's edge, tears streaming down his face, his lips moving in what might have been prayer or disbelief. Valeraine rose to stand on the marble floor of the great hall, the crown of roots glowing on her brow, her simple linen dress transformed by the descent into something that seemed woven from light itself. The stone platform that had carried her settled flush with the floor, seamlessly joining the marble as if it had always been there. The hall was utterly silent. Then, as one, every person in the room, noble and commoner, soldier and servant, believer and skeptic, fell to their knees. Not from command. From recognition. The land had chosen. And Valeraine, broken and reforged, had chosen to be worthy of it. The silence in the great hall stretched impossibly long, broken only by the soft rustle of the crown of roots as its golden vines shifted and bloomed on Valeraine's brow. She stood at the edge of what had been the chasm, what was now a vertical garden of impossible beauty, its walls covered in flowering vines that glowed with their own soft light. The platform that had carried her up had merged seamlessly with the marble floor, leaving no seam, no scar, only transformation. Hundreds of people knelt before her, not from fear, but from something deeper, the same instinct that made wolves recognize their alpha, that made rivers know their path to the sea. The land had spoken through her, and every soul present had heard it in their bones. All except one. Draven Bloodcrown stood alone among the kneeling masses, his face a mask of fury and disbelief. His hand gripped his sword hilt so tightly his knuckles had gone white. Around him, even his own guards had dropped to their knees, but he remained standing, trembling with rage or fear or both. "Parlor tricks," he spat, his voice cracking on the words. "Illusions and smoke, that crown is nothing but woven vines. Any gardener could." "Then take it from me," Valeraine said quietly. Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried through the hall with absolute clarity, resonating with harmonics that seemed to come from the stone itself. "If it's merely vines, merely illusion, then claim it. Prove you're right." Draven's face twisted. He took one step forward, then another, his boots striking the marble with aggressive force. His soldiers watched nervously, uncertain whether to stop him or support him. Seraphine had gone very still, her calculating gaze moving between Draven and Valeraine, already reassessing her allegiances. When Draven was 10 feet away, close enough that Valeraine could see the veins bulging in his neck, he drew his sword in one smooth motion. The blade caught the candlelight, sharp and lethal. "I don't need the land's approval," he growled. "I'll take the throne the same way my ancestors did, through strength." He lunged. Kale moved to intercept, but Valeraine raised one hand, not in defense, but in negation. "No," she said simply, and the word carried weight that transcended language. Draven's charge faltered mid-stride, not because he chose to stop, but because the marble floor beneath his feet turned suddenly, inexplicably soft. His boots sank into stone that had become viscous, yielding. He stumbled, fighting for balance, his sword arm windmilling. Valeraine placed her palm flat against the marble floor. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Roots erupted from the stone with a sound like thunder, not the thin tendrils that had grown from her blood, but massive, ancient roots as thick as a man's torso. They burst upward in a choreographed explosion of living wood, twisting and braiding around each other with impossible speed. The marble cracked and reformed around them, accommodating their growth as if stone and wood had always meant to merge. The roots didn't attack Draven. They ignored him entirely, growing past him on either side as he stood frozen in shock. They spiraled upward and inward, weaving together into a structure that was part throne, part living tree. The wood was golden brown, smooth as satin, and where branches met, they fused seamlessly. Leaves unfurled in real time, broad and green, creating a canopy overhead. Flowers bloomed in cascades, the same white and gold blossoms that grew in the chasm, filling the air with their honey spring scent. In less than 30 seconds, where there had been empty floor, there now stood a throne of living wood. Not carved, not constructed, but grown. It rose from the earth itself, its roots visible beneath the cracked marble, its branches reaching toward the vaulted ceiling. The seat curved perfectly to cradle a human form, upholstered not with fabric but with moss soft as velvet. The armrests terminated in spirals of polished wood that seemed to invite touch. The great hall had transformed from a place of judgment and death into something that resembled a sacred grove transplanted indoors. Light filtered through the leaves, dappling the floor with shifting shadows. The air itself tasted different, cleaner, alive with oxygen and growing things. Valeraine walked toward the throne, her bare feet silent on marble that had begun sprouting tiny shoots of grass wherever she stepped. She moved past Draven, who remained stuck in softened stone up to his ankles, too shocked to speak. She climbed the 3 root-formed steps and settled onto the throne. The moment she sat, the wood adjusted, growing slightly to accommodate her perfectly. The crown of roots pulsed with brighter light, and the throne's canopy responded, its flowers opening wider. Vines descended from above to frame her like a living curtain, not obscuring but highlighting. She looked like what she was, a queen of earth and growing things, crowned by the land itself. And then she looked at Draven. "The ground beneath you is cracking," she said softly. "Not because I will it, but because the land is weighing you, measuring what you've done, what you intend. Every falsehood, every cruelty, every grasping for power you haven't earned, it's all being judged." As she spoke, hairline fractures appeared in the marble around Draven's trapped feet. They spread in geometric patterns, glowing faintly with that same green-gold light. Draven looked down and went pale. "I could let it swallow you," Volcrun continued, her voice devoid of satisfaction or cruelty. "The way it swallowed your brother, the land would do it gladly. It remembers 500 years of suppression, of true sovereigns hunted and murdered, of its consciousness buried beneath blood wards. It would be justice." The cracks widened. Draven's breathing had gone ragged with terror. "But I choose mercy," Volcrun said. "Not because you deserve it, but because I refuse to rule through fear and vengeance. The Bloodcrun dynasty ends today, but it ends with exile, not execution. You have until dawn to leave the Northern Kingdom. Take only what you can carry. Your lands, your titles, your claims, all of it is forfeit. Go south, go east, go wherever you wish. But if you set foot in this kingdom again, the land will not be merciful a second time." She lifted her hand from the throne's armrest. The stone beneath Draven solidifyed instantly, releasing him. The crack stopped spreading but remained visible, a warning etched into the floor. Draven stumbled backward, nearly falling, catching himself on one of his guards' shoulders. "You can't," he started, but his voice had no strength behind it. "I already have," Volcrun said. "The land has spoken. Do you really want to argue with it?" Draven looked around the hall at the kneeling masses, at the impossible throne, at the chasm-turned garden behind her. His gaze lingered on his own soldiers, and whatever he saw in their faces made his shoulders slump in defeat. "Seraphine," he barked, "we're leaving, gather the men." But Seraphine hadn't moved from where she knelt. Her head was still bowed, her expensive black silk pooling around her on the marble. When she spoke, her voice was careful, calculated, stripped of its earlier arrogance. "No, Draven, you're leaving, I'm staying." She looked up, her eyes meeting Volcrun's with something that might have been respect or might have been tactical deference. "My cousin made choices that led to her death. I am not responsible for those choices, and I will not be punished for them. I came here demanding compensation for a loss I didn't grieve. I was wrong." She placed her forehead to the floor in full prostration. "I offer my house's apology and beg to be judged on my own merits, not my family's sins." Volcrun studied her for a long moment, reading calculation, but also genuine fear. Seraphine was a survivor, shifting with the political winds. Not admirable, perhaps, but understandable. "Your house may remain," Volcrun said finally, "but on probation. You will return south and govern your territories justly. I'll be watching, Seraphine. The land will be watching. Serve your people, not your ambitions, and will have no quarrel." Seraphine's exhale of relief was audible. "Thank you, Lundhut. Your mercy will not be forgotten." Druvan looked between them, betrayal and fury warring on his face. "Coward," he spat at Seraphine. "You'd bow to a jumped-up servant girl because she can make plants grow." "I bow to the land's choice," Seraphine corrected coldly. "Something your family should have done 5 centuries ago. Go, Druvan, your time is over." Druvan's jaw worked, but no words came. Finally, with a sound that might have been a sob or a snarl, he turned and strode toward the exit. Most of his soldiers followed, though Volkrun noted that several remained behind, their loyalties clearly shifted. The great hall remained silent until the sound of boots on marble faded completely. Then, slowly, people began to rise from their knees, whispers spreading through the crowd like wind through grass. Lady Ushcroft was the first to approach the throne, her sharp mind already working through implications. "Lendhut," she said formally, "the council will need guidance on succession law, if the throne is no longer hereditary." "It isn't," Volkrun said firmly. "Not anymore. I won't repeat the Bloodkrun mistake of pretending divine right flows through blood. The land chooses its sovereigns. If I have children, they'll have to prove themselves worthy just as I did. And if they're not," she gestured to the chasm garden, "the land will find someone who is." "That will cause chaos," Lord Ravencroft said nervously, stepping forward. "Nobles throughout the kingdom base their authority on bloodline. If we say that's invalid—" "I'm saying it's insufficient," Volkrun corrected. "Noble blood can still hold land, still govern, but only if they serve their people justly. The land will judge. And if they fail—" She placed her hand on the throne's armrest, and a single root burst from the floor near Ravencroft's feet, making him jump. "There will be consequences." The root withdrew as quickly as it had appeared, but the message was clear. Captain Drunna approached next, going to one knee before the throne. "Lundhut, what are your orders for the military? We have border disputes with the Eastern Territories, trade negotiations pending with—" "Form a new council," Volkrun interrupted. "Not just nobles. Bring representatives from the common people, farmers, craftspeople, merchants. People who know what this kingdom actually needs, not just what makes its rulers wealthy. That council will advise me on policy, and together we'll rebuild what the Bloodkrun dynasty corrupted." Murmurs rippled through the crowd, some approving, others scandalized. Nobles governing alongside commoners, unprecedented, revolutionary. "And what of those who oppose these changes?" Lady Ushcroft asked carefully. "Lord Bleckma fled before your return. He still has supporters in the Eastern Territories." "Then they can choose," Volkrun said simply. "Serve the land and its people or leave. I won't force anyone to accept my rule, but I also won't tolerate those who would oppress and exploit in the name of tradition." Thun had been hanging back, letting others speak first, but now he approached with tears streaming freely down his ancient face. 500 years, he whispered. 500 years of waiting, of preserving knowledge, of hopping. And now, his voice broke. Volkrun descended from the throne and embraced the old scholar, feeling his frail body shake with emotion. "Thank you," she whispered, "for keeping the truth alive, for believing when everyone else had forgotten." "The land chose well," Thun said, pulling back to look at her. "Muthua would be proud." Movement at the edge of her vision. Kull had been standing apart from the crowd, watching everything with his warrior's focus. Now he approached slowly, and something in his bearing made the crowd part, creating a clear path to the throne. He stopped at the base of the steps and went to one knee, but not in the formal supplication the others had offered. His posture was that of a guardian taking an oath. "Lundhut," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "I've failed you before. I watched you suffer and did nothing. I saw injustice and kept silent. I will carry that shame for the rest of my days." He looked up, meeting her eyes. "But if you'll have me, I swear to stand beside you, not as a subordinate, not as a subject, but as a partner, as a protector who will never again look away when you're threatened." Volkrun felt her throat tighten. "Kull." I make this oath to you and to the land itself, he continued. Your enemies are my enemies, your burdens are my burdens, and if you fall, I fall with you. The words hung in the air, heavy with intent and promise. Around them, the crowd had gone silent again, witnessing something that felt ancient and binding. Volkrun descended the steps until she stood directly before him. She placed her hands on his shoulders, feeling the strength and steadiness of him. Then rise, she said softly. Rise, Kull, and stand beside me. Not behind me, not before me, beside me. He stood, and when she gestured to the space beside the throne, he took it without hesitation. Not sitting, the throne was hers alone, but standing at her right hand, his presence a promise of protection and partnership. The symbolism wasn't lost on anyone present. A Lendhut and a warrior, earth and steel, growth and protection. Together, Volkrun returned to her throne and looked out over the assembled crowd, the kingdom she'd inherited not through conquest, but through suffering and choice. The chasm garden behind her glowed softly, a permanent reminder of judgment, rendered and mercy given. This is the beginning, she said, her voice carrying through the hall. Not of a dynasty, but of something new, a kingdom where power must be earned through service, where the land itself has a voice, where those who have been silenced can finally speak. She paused, letting the words settle. It won't be easy. Change never is. There will be resistance, conflict, difficult choices, but we'll face them together, all of us. Noble and common, powerful and powerless, because that's what it means to serve the land. To remember that we're all part of it, all connected to it. She placed her hand on the throne's armrest, and throughout the hall, tiny shoots of grass began pushing up through the marble cracks, life asserting itself in places that had been dead stone. The Bloodcrown dynasty tried to suppress the truth for 5 centuries, Valeraine continued. They built their power on lies and blood and stolen sovereignty, but the earth remembers everything. It remembered the Landhart bloodline. It remembered every injustice, every cruelty, every false claim. And when the time came, it rendered judgment. Her gaze swept across the upturned faces, seeing hope and fear and uncertainty in equal measure. I didn't choose this burden, she said honestly. It was thrust upon me through suffering I wouldn't wish on anyone, but I'm choosing what I do with it. I'm choosing to build something better than what came before, not through vengeance, but through renewal, not through domination, but through service. The crown of roots pulsed with warm light, and the throne's branches rustled though there was no wind. True power isn't taken, Valeraine said, her voice gentle but absolute. It's recognized by the people, by the land, by truth itself. She stood, Kale moving smoothly to stand beside her, and the earth has spoken. As if in response, the chasm garden behind her erupted with new growth. Vines cascaded down its walls, flowers blooming in waves of white and gold. The ceiling of the great hall, damaged when the throne first fell, began to repair itself, not with stone, but with living wood that grew and braided and sealed the gaps. In minutes, the hall had transformed completely, becoming something between throne room and sacred grove. The crowd watched in awe as the impossible became real before their eyes. And then, spontaneously, they began to sing. It started with one voice, an old woman in servant's clothes who Valeraine recognized from the kitchens. She sang in the old tongue, words Valeraine didn't fully understand but felt in her bones. Others joined, the melody spreading through the crowd like ripples in water. It was an ancient song, a welcome, a greeting for a sovereign the land had chosen. Valeraine stood on her living throne with Kale beside her, surrounded by growth and light and the voices of her people. And for the first time since Malekir had severed their false bond, she felt whole. Not because the pain had disappeared. It hadn't. The scars remained. But because she'd transformed suffering into purpose, humiliation into wisdom, powerlessness into a power that served rather than dominated. The earth had judged. The earth had chosen. And Valeraine, broken and reforged, crowned by roots and flowers, had finally come home. Outside, dawn broke over the northern kingdom. Light streamed through the new leaf canopy, dappling everything in green and gold. And deep beneath the castle, in the heart of the Landhart nexus, the land sang with joy. Its daughter had returned, and a new age had begun. And that, my friends, is the incredible story of Valeraine, the Luna Queen who was reduced to a footstool, only to have the earth itself crown her as its chosen sovereign. From packless servant to landheart ruler, she proved that true power isn't about who can dominate, but about who can endure, transform, and choose mercy even when vengeance would be easier. If this tale of cosmic justice and earth-shaking revenge resonated with you, smash that like button. It really does help the channel grow and lets me know you want more stories about underdogs who become unstoppable, about the powerless who discover they were powerful all along. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss a story. I post new tailies every week, stories about strong characters who refuse to stay down, about justice that comes in unexpected forms, and about the kind of transformation that changes entire kingdoms. And please share this video with someone who needs to hear it. We all know someone who's been underestimated, dismissed, or treated like they're invisible. Send them this story. Remind them that being knocked down doesn't mean staying down. That sometimes the person they try to bury is actually a seed that was meant to grow into something magnificent. What story should I tell next? What kind of revenge, redemption, or transformation do you want to see? Let me know in the comments, and your suggestion might become the next epic tale we explore together. Remember, true power isn't taken, it's recognized. And you, yes, you reading this right now, you have more power than anyone who's tried to diminish you ever wanted you to know. Until next time, stay strong, stay fierce, and never let anyone use you as their stepping stone. See you in the next story.